Monday afternoon here, 4 o'clock. Time for Sports for CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you had a great weekend. A month from Thursday, the Browns will get training camp underway, Greenbrier, West Virginia, and begin getting ready for that Hall of Fame preseason game against the Jets, an extra preseason game this year. This is from NFL.com. Storylines that deserve more attention. And they say the Browns are sneaky contenders. The roster's in good shape. Off-season moves precisely geared at targeting weaker spots and avoiding short-term fixes. It's a sounder approach. They still managed to do well in the draft despite lacking first and second round picks. Let's welcome in Tom Withers from the Associated Press. Tom, nationally it seems like the Browns are starting to gather some more momentum as a quote-unquote sneaky contender. I think the folks that covered them regularly have kind of thought that pretty much all along. They're right in the mix in the AFC.
Yeah, sneaky is a good word. It's going to be interesting. You know, there's so much expectation after so much disappointment last year. So, yeah, I tend to agree with that storyline that they are kind of a little bit under the radar, if you will, especially, after last year when there was such a spotlight on them, obviously for many of the wrong reasons because of the Deshaun Watson situation. So, I think for them to really make noise, it's about, winning those division games and being competitive with Cincinnati and Baltimore. And let's not forget about those Pittsburgh Steelers who rarely put one bad year together, never mind two. So, I tend to agree that in some ways the Browns may be overlooked. And I do agree with the assessment that they did do a good job of addressing many of their needs in the offseason, despite not having any draft picks or any high ones. Yeah,
and, again, they got to go out and do it on the field. As you mentioned, the last 2 years, really, after making the playoffs, the last 2 years haven't been what anybody thought their roster would accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, the roster's one thing, but let's be honest, Dave, it gets down to the quarterback position, right? And in 2021, you had the Baker Mayfield injury early on, and that kind of snowballed into its own larger problem. And then obviously with the Beckham situation, on top of some other key injuries, on top of a tough schedule, on top of people not overlooking them as they had in the past, this was a different Browns team. And then last year, obviously, the Watson suspension shaped the entire season, and to not have your franchise quarterback on the field for 11 games, I'm not sure if any team in the NFL could withstand that. So it is time, and obviously the pressure has been ratcheted up this year, not only on Kevin Stefanski, but also on Andrew Berry in this front office, and frankly, also on ownership. That was a major move they made last year. It was an all-in move, and so it's all about number 4 and his development this year and going forward.
Yeah, fair enough, without question. Found this really interesting. So this is from the Game Day NFL. Combined records over the last 3 seasons. The Browns are 26-24. That's 8th in the AFC. A little bit behind the Bengals, who are 26-22-1. Exactly even with the Chargers. And if you take it a step further, they're right around the Eagles at 27-22-1. And as you mentioned, they've done it without the guy that they think is a franchise quarterback. If they would have thought Baker Mayfield would have been a franchise quarterback, you give him that 5th-year extension. Then he gets hurt. Then you don't have Deshaun Watson. So, again, it all kind of points back to the roster's pretty good, but in order to get to the elite, you got to get better play out of the quarterback position.
It's interesting to look at their record in that context, isn't it, Dave? They kind of take on, it gives you kind of a different feel of where they're at in terms of how they stack up with the elite around the league. So, listen, to me, again, as I mentioned earlier, it comes down to, how do you play in your division? I think people forget that the Cleveland Browns have not won a division title since 1989, which is an incredible drought when you think about it. And so it's really going to come down to how you play in those 6 games against your division opponents. I think everybody has kind of dissected and done the schedule game now that we know what they're facing. And I think having 4 of those first 5 games at home is a huge plus for this team. Again, because of the change in the expectations this year and what everybody is expecting of this team, there's no reason for them not to contend from the outset. So, yeah, again, to me, it's all about number 4, and we've seen signs of progress in him already, and you just hope that he's ready to take that next step.
Yeah, and everybody's kind of pointing to the quarterback play. This is Steve Palazzolo, Pro Football Focus from the PFF NFL show, talking about how important Deshaun Watson is to this year's team.
The Browns obviously need Deshaun Watson to be not even the 90-plus player that he was in 2020. It's really the low 80s player that he was. I mean, it looked like he had this ascent into the elite quarterbacks where there was a point in Watson's career where the production was a little bit higher than the actual PFF grade. The Will Fuller effect, Sam, that's what that is. And having DeAndre Hopkins for big chunks of his career. But he got better in 2020. And, only 6 games last year, but 55 grade looked nothing like what he was previously. So that's what's really intriguing about the Browns and their potential. They're sitting on Deshaun Watson at quarterback where the potential is there, and then guys like JOK and guys like Elijah Moore.
And, Tom, you were out at mini camp. Was there a noticeable difference in him? I mean, you could tell the throwing is always – I remember watching him throw, and I'm like, I haven't seen anybody throw like that in a Browns uniform. Yeah. Was he noticeably more comfortable, more in control, or are we reading way too much into that this early?
Yeah, I think all of the above, Dave, as you just mentioned, but I think beyond that is that we're just viewing him through a different prism. It's the uncertainty has been lifted off of last summer. So while we were watching him in OTAs and minicamp last year, it was watching him and thinking, okay, how long is he going to be around for? Is he going to be suspended for 4 games, for 8 games, for the entire season? We didn't know. And so I think when we watched him last year, that was kind of hanging over this team, which in some ways is unfair to have to look at Deshaun that way, but it is what it is. And so the changes that I saw, Dave, were in just the way he kind of commanded himself on the field. I think he now knows that this is his team. There's no reason for him not to take full control of this team. And so I think in terms of, not only in the way that he threw, but in his body language and just the way he interacted with his teammates and Kevin Stefanski and the rest of the coaching staff, there was just this sense that, all right, I'm ready. All the other stuff is out of the way. Let's go. And so I just felt like there was a certainty and a comfort about him that we just weren't able to see last year, except for those 6 games when the suspension was lifted. So listen, as you mentioned before, we have never seen a quarterback with this skill set in Browns history. And that's with all due respect to the Brian Sipes and Bernie Kosars and Otto Grahams and Tim Couches and right on down the line. If you want to list off the other 27 we've had here since 1999, go right ahead. But we have not seen a quarterback of this caliber. Now, is he amongst the elite quarterbacks in the AFC? He was, but that was also 3 years ago now. And I think, when we talked last year about the 700 game or the 700-day layoff, rather, between games when he finally did come back last year. Well, now he's played 6 games in 1,000 days. So there still is that rust factor. I don't want to take anything away from the PFF guys there, but I'm always cautionary about guys that put up big numbers on bad teams. And that's exactly what Deshaun Watson did in 2020 with the Houston Texans. That was a 4-12 team. I find it akin to those guys that hit the 3-run homer when the team is already up 7-2. What does it really mean? So, I take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt in terms of when you start throwing those statistics around. But, they need him to play amongst the top 5 quarterbacks in the AFC, because I think on any given day, he kind of falls anywhere, in my mind, he falls anywhere in between that number 5 to number 8, depending on the performance in that given week. But, to put him amongst, Mahomes and Burrow and Allen and Herbert and Jackson at this point is tough. We're going to have to see it.
Yeah. He's got to go out and do it, without question. This is from Warren Sharp Football. Play action usage rate on early downs, 2022. Falcons number 1 at 58%. Dolphins up there. The Browns were tied for 17th at 35%. And I would expect that will go way up with Deshaun Watson for an entire season. Play action early. I think we're going to see that quite a bit.
You're going to see a lot of different wrinkles, Dave. I mean, I think this was the first time I can remember in the, what is it now, 24 or 5 years now that I've been covering the Browns on a regular basis, that I watched quarterbacks actually practicing the pitch and on an option play. We haven't seen that before. You see all kinds of new wrinkles because you have number 4 behind center. You know, the RPOs are one thing, but the misdirection is another. Just his inability to get outside of the pocket and do things, you know, on the fly and then have to improvise when he needs to. So, you know, what I would hope for the Browns and what I would hope for Deshaun Watson is that his play is able to elevate the entire team. And let's be honest, that's what the great quarterbacks do, right? As great as Patrick Mahomes is and as dynamic as that offense is in Kansas City, because of the way they play, that brings their defense up to another level. So I think it's incumbent upon Watson not only to do the things that he does well and convert on third downs and, you know, take advantage of the vertical passing game, which should be better this year, but he needs to lead by example on and off the field and raise the level of the Cleveland Browns as an entire group.
Tom Withers from the Associated Press and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. On the other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
We continue talking Browns with Tom Withers from the Associated Press. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, this is Jerry. I have a question about if the Browns were to sign a punter/kicker, could they keep an extra guy on the 53-man roster? And is Matt Ariza still available? Thanks. Bye.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. So, Tom, 53 means 53. The punter, the kicker, and the long snapper take up 3 of those 53. Matt Ariza is still available. Jets hosted him in May, but I can't see that. Can't see that happening here.
I think the Browns are pretty settled with their kicking game, to be honest with you, Dave. You know, for all the punting situation was not great last year, but Borkowitz had a pretty solid season. And as far as Cade York is concerned, they didn't, use a 4th-round draft pick to kick this guy out the door, literally or figuratively, so quickly. And I know for a fact that Kevin Stefanski is really high on Cade York. Obviously, the big move and made in the offseason in terms of the special teams was the change of the coordinator. And now with Bubba Ventrone in here, I think you're going to see a different approach in special teams across the board. Not only your kicking and your punting, but your coverage teams as well. I think you're going to see a little bit more daring out of them. I think you might see different types of athletes used at times, to be quite honest, in the way they cover kicks. I think York figured some things out last year, and he has spoken to some of us on the side and talked about how mentally, it was a real difficult season for him. He never really had those kinds of challenges that he experienced last year, never mind dealing with, the weather down at the stadium, which I don't know how those guys do it, because I'll be honest with you, Dave, I've been down there on the field and you think the wind is blowing one way and it's coming from the exact opposite way. And that can be in July, never mind in January. So it is really a challenge. It's as tough a place as there is to kick, and that's not making any excuses for anyone. So I think their special teams are in pretty good shape, to be quite honest. I think York is going to step up to the challenge. I have, much like some of my other media brethren, we do have high hopes for this kid, and I think he's a kid that could end up having a Pro Bowl caliber year.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the other thing to keep in mind is Andrew Berry went out and got a couple of guys who are first and foremost special teams players for Bubba Ventrone. That's a little bit different than in years past as well. All right, this from the Bleacher Report. Browns' biggest weaknesses ahead of training camp. They say depth at running back is one of them. Jerome Ford, Demetric Felton, John Kelly will all be competing for playing time throughout training camp and the preseason. If Chubb gets injured at any point, Browns could be in some trouble. I mean, you could say that about any main running back. I think Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are sold on Jerome Ford. That's as simple as I can put it.
Yeah, I do too. When you mentioned Nick Chubb, I did knock on whatever wood I could find here in my office, because he does need to stay healthy. I mean, you could argue that he is in some ways your most valuable player. I mean, I think there's a pretty good argument to be made for Nick Chubb being in that company. So in terms of depth, yeah, and the Kareem Hunt departure has created an opening here for Ford, who I know they're very high on, and I thought he did a really nice job last year, especially when they put him in on kick return. He really kind of filled a major void for them in that department, and they really have high hopes for this kid, and what we've seen out of him, Dave, in both OTA and minicamp, much like Watson and much like some of the younger players, there's just a confidence that he has. He's not a rookie anymore, and he kind of carries himself that way. Like he knows where to go on drills now. He knows what's expected of him. He's got a good coach in Stump Mitchell, showing him the way. And I think that's an important aspect of this team, is that they've got a very good coaching staff, and that goes from Kevin Stefanski right on down. And you talk about your Bill Callahans, but I'll put Stump Mitchell in that conversation. I think he's an excellent coach, and I say that not only from the way his guys are ready to play on Sundays or Thursday nights or Monday nights or whatever the case may be as far as games are concerned, but when we watch them in practice and watch them really break down the nuances of the position, I think Mitchell does a nice job. So I can see that in Ford. And you mentioned a couple of the other kids. That Kelly kid is a real intriguing player. There's times where we watch him in practice and he really does stand out. And so I really wouldn't worry about, again, knock on wood, Nick Chubb stays healthy and you're fine in that spot. But, with all due respect to a lot of the running backs around the league, there is, they can be a dime a dozen when you start talking about number 2 and number 3 guys. So God forbid they had to get in, if they were in a position where they had to go out and find somebody, there's plenty of stock on those shelves.
So the other position they say is wide receiver. So Cleveland has a lot of bodies at wide receiver heading into training camp, but it will need to sort them out. And if none of them prove to be great secondary targets, then it could be easier for opposing defenses to key on Amari Cooper this season. I kind of disagree with that one.
I do too, Dave. I was going to say I like their depth there, and they've got. What I think is going to be interesting is that they're going to have some tough decisions in terms of like Anthony Schwartz and David Bell, right? I mean, you've got a couple of young guys that they've invested in for the future, but now that you've gone outside, in free agency and trade and brought in Moore and Goodwin, you got some riches there that you didn't have last year. I mean, that was the position that we all looked at and said, oh my God, what are they going to do? How, they got to get some help for Watson. They got to get some help for Brissett. Whoever's behind center, they just didn't have, the kind of targets that a quality team has. And so, in terms of another guy, I think this is a big year for Donovan Peoples-Jones. I really do. I don't know if his ceiling is much higher than what we saw last year. And I think it's up to him to show everyone that he can be a, 60 reception, 70 reception guy. But, The other problem you're going to have is there's only one football, and Deshaun's going to have to spread it around to a lot of guys. In terms of that position, though, and what the speed of both Moore and Goodwin can bring to this team is really eye-opening when you see it in practice. And we always talk about that vertical threat, the guy that can take the top off of a defense. And when you see the Browns, even going through 7-on-7 or in the 11-on-11 stuff when they're working in, whether it be 2-minute or, whatever the case may be, but having that burner on the outside that can just stretch teams is imperative. And that opens up, it's one thing to have that guy go deep, but then that opens up all those windows closer to the line of scrimmage where your tight ends can run, where your running back can come out and find some space. So, I like their wide receiver position. It's not it wasn't a spot that I was actually circling last year, but I think they did a really nice job of fixing it up.
Yeah, I agree with you. And there is the ability to exploit matchups there. You have enough different skill sets that on any given week, they're going to look for, if we see this guy on this guy, go to him. And that's something they didn't have last year.
I totally agree, Dave. It's all about matchups. And you know what? What the Browns really lacked, in my mind, was kind of that twitchy guy, right? That guy you could put in the slot and have your quarterback take a one-step drop and just get him the ball and hope he can break a tackle. And, you hope that a 2-yard pass turns into a 12-yard gain. And they just didn't have that. But in Moore and Goodwin, they have two guys that can do that. And I don't think they're ready to give up on Anthony Schwartz either. I think here's a kid that I think had some major, mental obstacles to overcome in terms of, dropping passes, and his confidence really waned. And I don't think they're ready to give up on him quite yet. And so, I think those early days of camp are going to be really important for him. And as I mentioned before, I think for David Bell as well, this is a guy that he doesn't stand out when you watch them practice in terms of, his running ability or the way he runs routes. He's not, Amari Cooper is on another planet in terms of those kinds of things. But David Bell catches the ball and he finds a way to get open. And as long as he can stay healthy, I still think there might be a roster spot for him.
The third and final biggest concern, the biggest weakness ahead of training camp for the Browns, according to Bleacher Report, middle linebacker. They say beyond Anthony Walker, Cleveland doesn't have a ton of depth at inside linebacker, so it'll be counting on 27-year-old who's played only 16 total games over the first 2 seasons with the team. Tom, I think they're going to be playing a lot of 3 safety, 2 linebacker, and it's going to be JOK and Anthony Walker if he's healthy. But I don't think they're playing traditional 3 linebacker very often.
No, that's right out of the Jim Schwartz playbook. You're right. I think the days of, and I think sometimes we get caught up in that, especially as we think about the glory days for the Browns and the glory days of the NFL. The game has changed so much, Dave. And not only in the last 5 years, even in the last couple of seasons, to be honest with you. And so, in my mind, I think from a traditional linebacker standpoint, that does remain to be a weak spot for this team. And I think the bigger concern is that, we saw last year what Anthony Walker means to this team, not only from a talent standpoint, but just from a leadership standpoint. And we saw that. Just a couple of weeks ago out in minicamp and OTAs where he wasn't even on the field for most of the drills, but boy, he was leading by his voice and getting guys to line up. It's like having another coach out there, and that's not to be taken lightly by people because that's a real thing, especially when you have young players who are learning a new system. And so, I think between Walker and Taki, 2 guys who, by the way, coming off injuries, you've got enough there established in the middle that, you're going to have a good communicator. They need those other guys to step up, though, like you mentioned before. JOK has to have a big year. Jacob Phillips has to stay healthy. And they have some other young guys that they're going to, push and plug here and there. But I think you're exactly right that we're going to see a lot of those 3 safety sets. I think you're going to see Jim Schwartz try to use guys like JOK as a real kind of a hybrid type player, kind of a rover, if you will, and line him up in spots where you feel like you can exploit some weaknesses from that team. The bigger issue, though, Dave, defensively for the Browns is that defensive line has been revamped and upgraded, and Myles Garrett has some legitimate help inside and outside, and I think that's going to be the biggest change. And so while you may have, a bit of a weakness at that linebacker spot, I think the upgrade in the defensive line is going to help, make up for any of those shortcomings.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Tom Withers and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit about the Browns' offensive line. Sports4CLE, I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tom Withers from the Associated Press. This is from the Ross Tucker College Draft Podcast. Emory Hunt on the Browns' fourth-round picks.
McGuire, I thought, had a really good postseason and someone that gives them good rotational depth. We don't really hear about the depth behind Myles Garrett, which is why they went out and got Zadarius Smith. They needed depth at defensive end. They get that with McGuire. And I'm a big fan of DeJuan Jones. I feel like this is someone that's a future starter at the position. He's another one of these guys that's going to be fascinating to watch throughout the preseason because it's hard to hide him because he's so big and so large, but he's also talented. And I want to see how he performs because, man, what a great swing player you have if he's able to really star from day one once they put the pads on, because it's hard to get a good gauge on guys, especially point of attack during OTAs and mini camps.
And Tom, there's an opportunity here for Jones, and Bill Callahan is going to try to work his magic with this young man.
It's a big project, Dave. Literally a big project. It's going to be, I don't think they view DeJuan as, knock on wood, there's not a major injury that forces him to have to get on the field this year. I think he is literally going to be, a 2-year project for this team. And I hope he's, up to sticking with it. Because as many good things as I've heard about DeJuan in terms of being a good kid, a young kid, a kid that needs to learn. We were all 20 or 21 at one point and, made our mistakes and what have you. And so I think DeJuan's got some growing up to do. In talking to some of the coaches, that's what we had heard coming in. But my goodness, 6'8", you can't teach 6'8", 380, and especially one that moves as well as he does. So, he's a fascinating project. And if there's one guy who's going to fix him or get him right and get him ready to play, it's Bill Callahan. And we've already seen some of that interaction during OTAs and minicamp where we saw some of the one-on-one stuff that he was doing with DeJuan. We saw Jones have a rough first day where he had to take himself off the field and he got sick to his stomach and he wasn't in good condition. So you have to hope that he was one of those guys, Dave, that, during minicamp, it kind of sunk in with him that, hey, this can be my future. This can be my career. This is a job. I need to be a professional. So you would hope that in those, whatever it is, the 6 weeks or whatever, between minicamp and the start of training camp, he really takes it seriously and he gets himself into great shape, because I think the Browns really see him as, somebody that can help them out in the long term. It's not going to, like I said, I don't expect it to happen this year or next, but, to the point that the gentleman made before, they do need that kind of a swing tackle, because we've seen that over the last couple of years, right? One injury or two injuries, and suddenly you're moving people all over that line. So you need a guy who you can put in and have help you out at either right or left tackle. And I think the Browns view Jones as a potential guy to do that.
So this is from USA Today. One player from every NFL team for this season that is a make or break season. For the Browns, they say Jed Wills. While he has 2 more years left on his contract, 2023 will be telling year as to whether or not Wills will be in the long-term plans of the Browns. That's probably accurate. He's got to play like He's got to play better.
He's got to play like a number 10 overall pick, right?
He's been okay, but you expect better than okay when you're the 10th overall pick in the draft.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dave. It's one of those positions that, it's like the closer in baseball, right? When you're not good or you have a bad game, it really stands out, right? And I think that's what has happened with Jed at times. And there's also been, we've all seen the videotape of where it looks like he's, not giving his 100,000% on plays and kind of giving up and walking a little bit. And I know there's been some talk about whether he practices hard enough. I think this, kind of piggybacks off of what I said about DeJuan Jones a few minutes ago, which is that, Jed now is, 3 or 4 years into his career, and he's got to decide, is this for me or not? And this is a make or break year for him in that way. And maybe bringing Jones in puts a little bit of that pressure on Jed. There have been times where I've wondered if Jed is, has the passion to be the kind of player that the Browns thought they were getting when they took him. I think it was 10th overall, right in the draft. And so we'll see. I think, again, if Bill Callahan can work his magic with Jed, he can do it with anybody as well. And also, I think it's incumbent upon those veterans who have guided Jed to this point. I'm talking about Joel Bitonio and Jack Conklin and Wyatt Teller to a degree to make him understand how valuable he is to this team. And so, I think those messages are resonating with Jed. I like Jed. I think he's a really good kid. I think he's a little bit misunderstood. I think sometimes he maybe carries himself more like a wide receiver than an offensive lineman, if you know what I mean. But I've enjoyed my talks with him. I think he's a good player. We were very critical of him last year, and when I talked to some of his teammates and I talked to some of the coaches, they said he had a better year than we really realized. And I think sometimes we kind of fall in love with those, whether it's the PFF numbers or, like I said before, focusing in on 1 or 2 plays a game where, he might have had, 30 or 40 really good plays that kind of went unnoticed where he did do his job. And so, yeah, I do think it is a big year for number 71.
All right, before we go to break, this is from CBS Sports. Best duos on every team heading into the 2023 season. For the Browns, 2 guys you mentioned, the guards, Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller. Bitonio coming off his 2nd consecutive first-team All-Pro selection, allowing 1 sack and 19 pressures in 2022. That's a 4% pressure rate. Teller wasn't an All-Pro in 2022, but allowed 4 sacks, 23 pressures, 4.83 pressure rate. And the telling thing about that, Teller's a better run blocker than he is pass blocker, and he was a little banged up much of last year.
I think he was a lot banged up, Dave. I think there were some weeks where it was really difficult for Wyatt to be on the field, and we saw a game or 2 where he took himself off the field because he wasn't serviceable and wasn't getting the job done. And I think, that's an underrated part, I think, of the game that I think we in the media and fans sometimes take for granted is how banged up these guys are and how much they have to go through to get themselves ready to play on game day when, they may be having an injury that would keep you and I in bed for 2 weeks. So, I think it's, hey, listen, the Browns are lucky, to the point about a good duo. I mean, they've got 2 of the best guards in the NFL. That goes without saying. Joel Bitonio, I could argue on some days is the most valuable player on the Browns roster. I mean, in my mind, he is certainly one of the top 3 players that they have at any position. He's been fantastic for a long time. And, while we induct one Hall of Famer this summer, there's going to be a growing movement for Joel Bitonio when he's done to also be in Canton. He's been that good and consistently that good year after year after year. And so, again, they've got 2 of the best, and they've got a great offensive line coach, and I guess we should be thankful that we've got him.
Yeah, again, pressure up the middle is a bad thing, and those 2 do not allow it. So we'll hopefully it translates to some more wins. Tom Withers and I are going to step aside, take another timeout. Other side of the break, we'll take a look at some areas where the Browns might be looking for some more depth. Sports for CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Tom Withers from the Associated Press. This from the Game Day NFL, and they are ranking Pro Football Focus's top offensive lines. Eagles number 1, Browns 2, Chiefs 3, Ravens 4, and Lions number 5. And Tom, the line is that good, and there were guys that were banged up a season ago, and they still grade out that high.
And Dave, when you consider that they basically went through 5 centers last year, it's pretty remarkable to consider that Ethan Posick, I don't think people fully appreciated what that guy meant to the team last year and what he was able to do in stepping in after, Nick Harris was, well, first of all, Teller is released, and then Nick Harris suffers the season-ending injury a play or two into the preseason opener in Jacksonville. And Postage comes in, and a guy who had played some center but mostly guard and was just remarkable and really anchored that team and anchored, one of the best offensive lines in football. And, I think last year as well, Jack Conklin coming back from injury and, he wasn't himself. And so, but they believed in him enough to give him another 4-year contract. And so, yeah, that's the one place where you are really set. Again, knock on wood, you don't have any major injury, but they did add some depth here in through the draft and stuff just to protect themselves going forward. But yeah, it's a great group. I think what's going to be interesting too, Dave, is that they were all learning how to adjust to Deshaun last year in a very short window, right? In only 6 games. And when you got a quarterback with that skill set back there, obviously he starts to improvise. You got to block a little bit longer. There were a lot of little, subtle things and nuances that they just didn't have enough time to work on. So I think, with this offense looking different this year, maybe with a little more of an emphasis on the running game, or maybe a different look to this running game this year, because you're going to have such a mobile quarterback. I would tell people, when you think about what this Browns offense can look like, take a close look at the way the Eagles ran their offense last year from a running standpoint. And I think that might be, this is a copycat league, and don't think for a second that Kevin Stefanski and his crew didn't take a close look at the way the Eagles used Jalen Hurts and their running backs and the way they blocked up front. So, again, we should feel very fortunate that the Browns are settled on the offensive line, because listen, it's a tried and true tradition. You can go back to the NFL of the 1940s and 50s. It all begins up front, and that is very true, whether it's opening holes for Nick Chubb or for blocking for number 4.
All right, this from Dog Pound Daily. 4 position where Browns could have depth concerns. Number 4, they say offensive line, mainly at left tackle. Number 3, linebacker. Number 2, they go with running back. And number 1, they go with defensive tackle. They upgraded the defensive tackle pretty significantly, but I get it. If you get an injury there, if Delvin Tomlinson is unable to go, it's kind of like, ooh.
Yeah, and there's some guys there that they have invested in again that are hoping can finally kind of turn the corner, and I'm talking about Jordan Elliott, Tommy Togiai, guys that have looked really good in practice at times, have had some moments in games, but haven't been the consistent kind of rotational players that you really need. But fear not, because Jim Schwartz he's gonna keep throwing guys out there until something sticks. So and make sure you have your scorecard and on your roster available, because he is going to be shuffling guys in and out, play after play. I mean, he's going to use probably a rotation of 8 or 9 guys up front. So he's always got fresh bodies out there. That's the way he's always run his defense. And so while you can talk about, the depth at that tackle position being an issue, and I would say it's something to keep an eye on, but it's no different than pretty much any other spot on the team, in my opinion. But I do think in getting Tomlinson, you really have landed a guy who potentially could have a monster season for you. And again, it's not necessarily, Dave, that he's going to have an inordinate amount of tackles or sacks. He is just going to, eat up some space up front and allow those mobile ends that you've got to get after the quarterback. And so, again, that's why a lot of times when I look at those PFF grades, I really take them with a grain of salt, because you don't know what the assignment was on a given play. So when you're talking about how a guy either blocked a play or if you put pressure or whatever, you don't know what his assignment was. So it's one thing to watch it and assign a grade to it when you really don't know. So I think Tomlinson is a major upgrade. Is just going to make everybody better. But to me, the biggest offseason acquisition, Dave, was Jim Schwartz. And I think he has come in here to turn around a unit that, forget the Watson suspension for a second. It was the inability of that defense to make plays that had as much to do with that 7-10 record as anything else.
And they underperformed.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we were talking they could be a top 10 defense, and they were nowhere near it.
And injuries, there were some other factors that came into play as well, but as a whole, they really did underperform.
Tom Withers, Associated Press, thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it, Tom.
Anytime. Nice talking to you, Dave.
Tom Withers, make sure you check him out. Always really insightful coverage of the Browns for the Associated Press. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams. I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Steve Palazzolo from Pro Football Focus's NFL show about breakout candidates for the Browns this year.
JOK. I mean, my reasoning there is he hit the ground running as a rookie. He's been banged up, took a little bit of a step back last year, but I think the star potential is there. Undersized linebacker who just flies around the field, makes a ton of plays. So I think the potential is absolutely there for JOK to be a top 15 or so linebacker in the NFL, top 10 to 15 linebacker. And then Elijah Moore, I'm eating it all up, man, eating up all the offseason hype. Right? He's getting open at camp and, great rapport, and he was just, stuck at the bottom of that Jets depth chart, even though, it's not the greatest receiver depth chart over the last couple of years. But Elijah Moore is going to have this wide receiver 2/3 breakout here for the Cleveland Browns. Liked him a lot coming out of Ole Miss, just hasn't had a ton of opportunities with the Jets, so he's going to break out here.
Yeah, me and Mike Renner had a bet on Elijah Moore. I forget what the exact terms were, and he was obviously a lot higher on Moore coming out than I was. There were quite a lot of people that liked Moore a lot. I'm starting to come around, even with a relative lack of evidence that they were right and I was wrong. I think Elijah Moore is kind of primed for that breakout if the Browns can get him the ball the way that the Jets weren't able to or didn't want to.
With that, let's welcome in Tyler Johnson, Faithful Dogs Podcast Network 216. Tyler, I think they're going to make a concerted effort to get Elijah Moore touches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. You've already seen just clips from mini camp and OTAs, and again, they're not in pads yet, but Elijah Moore is a focal point of what the Browns are doing on offense. You're seeing him line up in the slot. You're seeing him line up outside. You're seeing him line up in the backfield with Deshaun Watson. They're going to find multiple ways to get Elijah Moore the football. And I think when you have a talent like that, the Jets never used him properly. Obviously, they never had a great quarterback playing with Zach Wilson, playing with Joe Flacco. I mean, not the best quarterback, but Elijah Moore is going to have a breakout season for the Browns. And I really don't think it's far-fetched to think that Elijah Moore could lead this team in receptions, not necessarily yards, but just receptions, because he's going to be probably Deshaun Watson's safety blanket, especially over the middle of the field as a slot wide receiver. But also, if he's coming out of the backfield, he's a mismatch for any linebacker in the NFL coming out of the backfield, especially with his route running, his ability to separate as well as he is. And keep in mind, he's still a very young player, and there's a good chance if he has the year that a lot of Browns fans hope and a lot of us believe he will have, he could end up receiving a contract extension from the Browns this offseason.
Well, along those lines, every team's most important contract extension ahead of the 2023 season. This is from the Bleacher Report. They say wide receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones can take over as veteran leader in the receiver room if Cooper departs, but the Browns run the risk of losing both wideouts if they don't extend him now. With $17.2 million in cap space remaining, Cleveland can and should lock up Donovan Peoples-Jones now. I know you've dealt with this question on Network 216. Do you think they extend Donovan Peoples-Jones, or do you think he becomes a free agent? And what is the sweet spot for price? It's all price dependent.
Yeah, a lot of this is price dependent with Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think the tough thing for him, when the Browns drafted Cedric Tillman, it made it seem like that they were not going to extend Donovan Peoples-Jones. Now, the question becomes, did the Browns offer him an extension and Donovan Peoples-Jones didn't like the money, so he didn't take it? Because if you look at the wide receiver market this past year, you have Juju Smith-Schuster, Jacoby Myers, DJ Chark, some of these guys getting double-digit millions per year. And Donovan Peoples-Jones has ascended every single year he's been a part of the Browns, which you really like to see. The touchdown number, though, has not gone up. And with a big body receiver like Donovan Peoples-Jones, 6'2", 205 pounds, you really want to see that touchdown number increase. And if it does this year, he's going to get a big-time payday, and it probably isn't going to be from the Browns. Because do you believe Donovan Peoples-Jones is a wide receiver one? That's what you have to look at. Are you willing to give him potentially that bigger type of contract? As of right now, I'm not. I just think I have to see more from him. I mean, 839 yards last year, 61 receptions, 3 touchdowns. That's really nice. You got to see that next step this year. I still think there's a chance he could be re-signed by the Browns. If he takes a huge step, well over 1,000 yards, we'll say 7 or 8 touchdowns, then I think they find a way to get a deal done, because I think then the Browns, much like was pointed out there, they could let Amari Cooper go, because Amari Cooper will be pushing 30. You save $20 million in cap, then you can bring in Donovan Peoples-Jones cap hit for next year, my bad, and that would offset Amari Cooper. Well, right now, the issue with extending him right now, I don't know if Donovan Peoples-Jones wants to extend right now, because why would Donovan Peoples-Jones want to take an offer that could be probably about $6 to $8 million a year, when if he takes that next step, he's getting double-digit millions on the free agent market. So I think the Browns would love to extend him, and I think they might have tried to do that. But also that could have been why you saw that Cedric Tillman was selected where he was, to potentially replace Donovan Peoples-Jones if he leaves in free agency. So I would love to keep DPJ. I think that his story is fantastic, being a 6th-round pick and still on the roster this late into his career, because you don't see that from a lot of NFL players. But the numbers are going to have to work, and right now I just don't see the numbers working out.
Yeah, there are 31 wide receivers who make an average of $10 million or more in the NFL. You contrast that by running backs, I think there's 7. But if he puts up the kind of numbers you're talking about, he's looking at, an average salary that's 3-4 years, more than $10 million. That's going to be tough for the Browns to do. Let me ask you this. What new acquisition on defense are you looking forward to seeing play in Jim Schwartz's system most?
For me, it's Ogbo Okoronkwo, and I never pronounce his name correctly, so I apologize to him. But I really just like the acquisition of the defensive end from the Texans. Now, when originally he was brought in, we thought that he was going to start alongside Myles Garrett on the defensive line. But when you bring in Zadarius Smith, he gets to go back to that rotational type of defensive end. And I just think he's really going to accelerate playing next to Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith, because we've already seen it some in minicamp and OTAs. He's getting the opportunity with that NASCAR package to play on the outside. You line up Zadarius Smith on the inside, Myles Garrett, you have Dalvin Tomlinson out there. There's just so many ways Jim Schwartz can use him. And if you look at his production as a rotational end, 75.1 overall grade. He still had 5 sacks this past year. Give him those rotational reps. He's also never had talent like this that he's been playing with on the defensive line. He had some of it with the Rams, playing with Aaron Donald, obviously. That really helped. But now he's going to have Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, be able to play with all of them. His main job is going to be just get after the quarterback, which is where he excels the most. So I can't wait to see what he does in this system. I really want to see how many snaps he gets per game, because I think that he's mainly going to be used on third downs, but also he now is going to be spelling Myles Garrett frequently too. That way you don't have Myles Garrett in on every single series, which you don't want anyway, because you don't want Myles Garrett to wear down as much in the fourth quarter. So Browns have a lot of depth on the defensive line, especially at defensive end, and I think Ogbo is probably going to have a career year, especially in Jim Schwartz's scheme.
Tyler Johnson and I are going to step aside, take one more time out, other side of the break. Some dream scenarios for the Browns for the 2023 season. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dogs podcast, as well as Network 216. This one from Dog Pound Daily. 5 dream scenarios for the Browns in 2023. Number 5, Jed Wills proves to be the future left tackle. Number 4, Jim Schwartz helps the Browns lead the NFL in sacks. Number 3, Browns rival quarterbacks trend in the wrong direction. So you're talking about Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Kenny Pickett. Number 2, Elijah Moore looks like the player we saw at Ole Miss. And number 1, Deshaun Watson returns to form. And Tyler, I would say this. If number 1 happens, none of the other 4 really matter, because, and that's not fair, but if Deshaun Watson gets back to being a top 5 type quarterback in the NFL, the Browns can overcome any of the others that don't happen.
Yeah, a lot of times in the past, under Kevin Stefanski, the biggest thing was, could the rest of the roster overcome some issues at the quarterback position? Now it's, if Deshaun Watson's the player that we all know he is and the Browns paid for and gave up all the assets to acquire him, if he's that type of player, the rest of what they say pretty much doesn't matter, because then he's elevating everyone else around him as it is. But everything that was mentioned there, I think has a good chance to happen, except when you talk about number 3, the rival QBs trending in the wrong direction, you know what you got in Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson. I think the hope there is that Kenny Pickett doesn't really become the franchise quarterback for the Steelers, and then they have trouble trying to find a quarterback. That's what we hope for. But, yeah, Deshaun Watson at number 1, if he returns to form, pretty much none of the others matter. They would be nice, and it would be helpful for sure, but Deshaun Watson's the key to the Browns' success this year, for sure.
Yeah, the other thing I would say, number 4, if Schwartz helps the Browns lead the NFL in sacks, that can compensate for a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very possible, especially when you have Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, 2 of the best defensive ends in the league on either side of the defensive line. You add in Ogbo Okwonkwo. You have Dalvin Tomlinson coming in. It's possible that they could lead the NFL in sacks. Would not surprise me one bit. And it would just imagine how far the Browns defense has come in a year if we are able to say at the end of this year that we led the NFL in sacks. So it would be absolutely phenomenal. But it's not out of the realm of possibility either.
All right. This is Emery Hunt on the Browns' late-round picks. This is from the Ross Tucker College Draft Podcast.
I'm looking at Cam Mitchell. In my notes I have, he plays a lot bigger than his listed size. I love the mentality he has out there. Northwestern secondary has been really good, and we saw Cleveland already go that route a year ago with his teammate. So they already have some, familiarity with Northwestern and how they coach their defensive backs, and they clearly have a type, and Northwestern is able to tap into that for them. Whippler is a guy a lot of people thought probably was going to go on early day two. So where they got him, I feel like is great value. Good depth backing up Ethan Posich. So that's a really good pick for them. And also you feel like when you think about Dorian Thompson-Robinson and you look at that depth chart of Cleveland, clearly they have a type there as well. They love the athletic limber guy, Deshaun Watson, Josh Dobbs, Kellen Mond. They love guys that can get out on the move. They're wiry guys, so they love the fact that they have that bendability, athleticism, I like to call it.
And Tyler, you know what? That's a really good point about Cam Mitchell, because they know how Northwestern cornerbacks translate into their system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Cam Mitchell pick surprised me because I'll admit I did not do a ton of research on Cam Mitchell. But when you look at what he did at Northwestern, very similar type of player to Greg Newsome. And it goes to show Northwestern is really good at developing NFL talent. What's funny about Northwestern, and it kind of doesn't make any sense, they're really good at developing NFL talent. They're obviously not good at having high levels of it every single year to compete, obviously, with Ohio State, Michigan, the rest of the Big Ten elite teams. But they do produce a lot of really good talented players. Cam Mitchell, I think, is going to be the next one. And I think bringing in Cam Mitchell, he's not going to probably get a ton of reps this year as a rookie, but he's going to have time to slowly come in, progress, and probably eventually after this year could end up taking A.J. Green's spot on the depth chart. And then, again, you could draft someone to eventually take the next step for the next cornerback that you have on the roster that ends up leaving at some point. So Andrew Berry loves drafting corners. He's also really good at finding talent at corner. And I'm glad they brought up Luke Whippler, because I firmly believe when you can get a talent like that in the 6th round now, of course, he's not the most athletic guy. That kind of is the biggest knock on him. He's not the best athlete at the center position, but he's just a solid all-around football player. And being a starter at Ohio State for as long as he is, that's not very common at that level. And so Luke Whippler, being able to get him in the 6th round, he's going to have competition with Nick Harris. I think Nick Harris is firmly on the roster bubble right now to see who's going to be the future at center. But I think the Browns and Luke Whippler got their future starter at the center position. He is a steal to me, and a great job by Andrew Berry taking the best available talent.
Yeah, if the biggest knock you can have on a guy taken in the 6th round is he doesn't have a lot of upside, Okay, we don't really expect that from a 6th-round pick. If a 6th-round pick becomes a starter, it's a great pick.
Exactly the point. And that's funny that you mentioned that, because we were just talking about that with Donovan Peoples-Jones. The fact Donovan Peoples-Jones is in year 4 with the Browns, has been a starter for the Browns, has produced, and we're talking about him potentially getting a contract extension with the Browns or receiving double-digit millions on the free agent market. If you're a 6th-round pick and that can happen for you in your NFL career, that's a phenomenal career right now, because normally you're not expecting that. So, yeah, getting Luke Whippler in the 6th round, complete steal, and you don't need him to be an elite talent. You just need him to be a solid NFL football player, which is what you're looking for if you can find those diamonds in the rough that late in the draft.
Tyler Johnson, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tyler.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Tyler Johnson, make sure you check him out. Faithful Dogs podcast, as well as Network 216. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE. Woohoo!